So this is a description of a busy sporting event. First paragraph starts fairly well. It is a hot summer Sunday. Everyone is here for the same reason. It is race day. Then we want capital T. The ring of tarmac is like a thick jet black snake that is lying there coiled. If you look closely, you can see rays of heat just above the smooth asphalt, just blurring your vision. So we've got some images here which are powerfully appealing to the senses. Jet black, for example, smooth asphalt. We've also got some attempt to use sentence length to grab the reader's interest and attention. It is race day, for example, is a good use of a short sentence to try and capture the mood. One thing that could be improved is you are better off, if you can, to avoid using the verb to be in any form. So is or was or were, for example, generally tends to suck some energy out of your writing. If we look at the first one, it is a hot summer Sunday. A better verb for that would be something about the sun. The hot summer sun beats down. So we get rid of is, which is a very boring filler verb, and instead choose something which appeals to the senses more powerfully. So if we just do that to every sentence in this opening paragraph, get rid of is in the first one and change it to something like hot summer sun beats down. Everyone is here for the same reason. Well, we could change is here, everyone waits. You want to get a verb which is more powerful than just is. It is race day. Well, how about race day looms? Choose a better verb. Avoid using is wherever you can. We can see how powerful a change that would make to the next sentence. The ring of tarmac is like a thick jet black snake that is lying there coiled. I would actually not only change the verb there, but also the word order to make it a bit more exciting. So how about, for example, lying there coiled, comma, a thick jet black snake, comma, the ring of tarmac, now give it a verb. Lying there coiled, comma, a thick jet black snake, comma, the ring of tarmac, now put an exciting verb is, not is. Glistens, shines. Think of a good verb. If you were clever with your verb choice, you might have chosen something that suits the idea of it being coiled. So something about glistens or shines, like the skin of a snake, would help to develop your coiled image. If you look closely, you can see rays of heat just above the smooth asphalt, just blurring your vision. Now, I would instead have gone there for something like rays of heat above the smooth asphalt, blur your vision. Cut out unnecessary words whenever you can. The reason for that is it helps your important words to stand out. So what we've done to the first paragraph to make a strong opening is got rid of weak padding verbs, chosen more sensory ones, and we've also changed the word order a bit to show that we can begin sentences with something other than the grammatical subject. One of the quickest ways to do that is to start with an ing phrase, lying there coiled, comma. So take any verb, use its participle form like lying, and it works as an adjective phrase to modify that noun that's going to come next. We've also cut out padding words that we don't need so that the good words have a chance to stand out properly. Let's have a look at the next one. I like the way that he has given each of his images its own paragraph. That helps the examiner give you a high mark, because in the mark scheme, to get into top band, you need to have many well-defined and developed images. So if you give each image its own paragraph, it will force you to have a good number of them aim at around 8 or so. So each image across 2 sides of A4 gets about a quarter of a page. And if you know that each image has its own paragraph and you can't go to the next one until you've written a whole paragraph on it, it's going to force you to develop it as well. Outside the track, it is ringed by crowds, stuffed into the stands, shoulder to shoulder, all in lines, but everyone is moving up, down, from side to side. So this one here, we can see is coming in again, being a bit boring, so we know to upgrade that. How about crowds ring the track, or crowds surround the track? Stuffed into stands, shoulder to shoulder, all in lines. And then, but everyone is moving up, down, from side to side. I would cut that phrase out, moving up, down, from side to side, and think of a verb that captures that idea more powerfully. But everyone jostles, everyone tussles for the best view. So that would be an upgrade to is. You might also be able to think of a metaphor or simile to describe the movement of the crowd. He has a good go at that to describe the noise in his next sentence. All their shouting is just a fog of noise from afar. So the image of a fog there is a good one, but he hasn't yet developed it. So note down in the margin a couple of ways in which fog could have been developed there to get him more marks. It's a good image, but he's wasted it a bit. Think what a fog might do that you could use to explore this image of the shouting. Perhaps it's a bit confusing. Maybe it is overwhelming, spreading through the whole atmosphere. Maybe you can't make out individual voices. Fog makes things hard to distinguish. So maybe it turns into just a murmur. You've got to use that fog image to help you move up the mark scheme. Now, after from afar, we've got a comma where there should be a semicolon or a full stop. You mustn't use commas to join sentences together. All their shouting is just a fog of noise from afar. Semicolon. The circle of crowds looks like a speaker beating up and down from above, pumping out noise into the usually tranquil landscape. So I think that's a brilliant image because you've got the way the crowd is moving, looking like the cone on a speaker when the volume's high, and you can actually see it pulsing the air. So again, as with the fog image, that is a good idea that's not fully developed. So here we've got beating up and down, pumping out noise. I would think of some more verbs, some more images you could use to describe that sense of the crowd pulsing or vibrating. So it might be the ripples of excitement as the crowd move about in their seats, stand up, sit down. Just note down 2 or 3 ways in which that speaker pulsing image could have been developed. Remember, to get into top band, you need to have not only many images, but they need to be well developed. So if you go to the trouble of thinking of some exciting images like a fog or a speaker, ask yourself, how can I use this in 2 or 3 different ways so I can show off development? Each person is wearing a vibrant cap or t-shirt of their favorite team. What we've really got in this paragraph is a handful of images, each one of which is just mentioned rather than developed. So we've got the crowds that surround the track who are all stuffed into a small space. That's one image. Then we've got the shouting as a fog of noise, image 2. Then we've got image 3, the speaker beating up and down. Then we've got each person wearing a cap or t-shirt. So in one paragraph, we've got 4 images, each one of which gets between about 1.5 lines and 2 lines. Really, what you'd need to do is reduce the number of images and give each one more attention. If I were to turn this into a full marks answer, I could probably take one of those images and give it about 8 lines by itself to be one paragraph fully developed. So there's no shortage of ideas here, but it's about what you do with them that counts. For example, look at the last sentence. Each person is wearing. Note that is again creeping in. Try and get rid of it where you can. Rather than saying each person wears a vibrant cap or t-shirt, paint a better picture for your reader. If you were to be the director of a film scene here, you wouldn't be able to get away with saying each person wears a cap or t-shirt. You would have to have a specific person of a certain age and hair colour and height and build and a specific colour doing something in particular for your shot or for your image which you paint. So next to that last sentence now, bring it to life for me, make it more vivid with specific, precise details. So who is this person? Imagine you were watching Formula One on telly and the camera now zooms into one person in the crowd who is going to capture something about the pre-race mood. So next to that sentence, tell me who it is. Maybe it is a grandfather with his grandson. They're both sitting there wearing the same cap, excited, waiting for the race to start. Tell me about the expressions on their faces. Tell me what colours they're actually wearing. You've got to note down small details to bring the scene to life. This is a great idea of having something about the crowd, but you must zoom in. It might be a look in their eye. It might be the way the sunlight falls on their face. It could be a particular expression they're making. Maybe the cap is tilted slightly to the side, whatever it is. Maybe they've got a drink. This is what precise detail means. If you were a film director wanting to say to everyone exactly how you want this to be, this is your close-up shot, what is it going to be? 2 or 3 things. And now the next thing I want you to do with this paragraph is almost every sentence is about 2.5 to about 1.5 lines long. So imagine we're playing sentence Tetris here. That's a nice way to think of it. Look how his last sentence of their favourite team, if you're playing sentence Tetris, then you have to think of a really tiny sentence to fit into that slot. So this is a good way to stop yourself always having about 1.5 line sentences, which is what most people, without thinking about it, will tend to write. So sentence Tetris, fit something into that tiny gap between team and the margin. Give me a 3-word sentence or so. Make it dramatic, hard-hitting. Give me an exciting image, a powerful verb. There's a sense of expectancy. Maybe just excitement hovers. So for the opening of the piece then, which is when you were saying to the examiner, look, here's the kind of writer I am. Make no mistake about it. Your first little bit, they've already got a rough idea of what grade you're going to be getting. So we don't want to be showing any comma splicing. We don't want boring verbs like is. We don't want to be saying, I'm the kind of guy who pretty much always writes 1.5 line sentences. I also have some good imagery, but I never really develop it. We've got to show, look, this is what I can do, and I'm going to maintain this for the rest of the answer. Good first impression, and we maintain it consistently. To summarise the upgrades we made then, make sure that you avoid using is, was, or were. Instead, focus on strong verbs that appeal to the 5 senses. Vary sentence openings by starting with ing phrases sometimes. You should also cut out empty padding words. Think about making your strong word choices stand out. Focus on having just a few images per paragraph, maybe even just one. This will force you to write a lot about a little, rather than failing to develop your ideas by having a little about a lot. You should also play sentence Tetris to ensure that you vary your sentence lengths. Some other places sentence Tetris would have won more marks here would be after it is race day, a sentence going to the end of the margin here, perhaps even after summer Sunday, a short one here, after vision, a short one here. You could also have after from side to side, a short one here. Looking at the next 2 paragraphs, there are some other tips that we can learn from this piece of writing. Look at the simile comparing the people busily trying to maintain the cars and prepare them for racing, comparing them to bees in a hive. On the inside of the track, it is completely different. Watch out for the comma splice. All the teams have set up neat garages in lines, but look inside. comma splice again. Make sure you check your commas if you notice that full stops could go where they are, because either side of the comma is a sentence. You must change it to either full stop, capital letter, or a semicolon. So I'm going to change this one to a semicolon because that is a nice, easy fix. Now that's correct. Everyone is running round like bees in a hive. But instead of black and yellow bees, they all wear matching overalls of the team, but with marks of oil from their rushed preparation of the car. This is a great image to play around with, but he only really says one thing about it, which is that instead of the black and yellow colour, they've got marks of oil on them. So his connection between the workers on the cars and bees in a hive is just colour. It's a good image that could get him far more marks than it does here if he takes the trouble to develop it. Remember, top band on the mark scheme requires carefully developed images. So here are some examples of ways in which you could connect the workers on the car to bees in a hive. All of these would be good developments. He's got some ideas about colour, that's fine. How about a steady droning or humming noise of activity, like a hive in swarm? How about the number of them all clustered around the car, busily working as a collective? How about the way they move? It might be very precise or very busy, non-stop. How about the idea of a queen bee who commands everybody and gives orders so they all know what their place in the group is? So rather than just colour, this great simile comparing the workers to bees in a hive could actually get you about 5 developed ideas, in which case you can easily see how it can become almost the substance of the paragraph. Just one image fully developed across one paragraph is the kind of thing you should be aiming at to get into top band. So don't just mention a figurative image, simile or metaphor. Instead, you want to make it work for you. After you've used your imagination and thought of something interesting like this, don't waste it by moving on too quickly to the next idea. This again comes back to that principle of saying a lot about a little. Really let each image sink in. Now, in the next sentence, the first thing to spot is capital letters at the beginning of sentences, and also watching out for comma splicing again. This is actually quite an accomplished piece of writing in terms of its imagery and the structure of the piece. So we don't want silly mistakes like comma splicing and capital letters to cost us marks and leave a poor impression on the examiner. You've got to have higher standards than this when you proofread. It's essential that you leave a couple of minutes at the end to check for any things like this that don't suit the quality of the rest of your writing. The cars are all lined up on the grid, like spots on the snake. Look at how he's remembered to echo his detail of the track being like a snake earlier. This means that the examiner is going to be able to see that his piece has a structuring device going through it. And one image that you echo and refer to again and again, like the snake here, for example, is a great way to do that. A description doesn't need a plot, but it does need a pattern. So think about what patterns you can draw through all the different details you include. You mustn't have a shapeless list of random sensory details. There must be some kind of pattern to it. So the snake image here, working as a motif, is a very clever way of doing that. In one car, the driver is sitting, all strapped in and ready to go. Comma should be here. But he checks his watch and taps the steering wheel, that should be there, just waiting for one small light to go green. I like how he's mentioned a small vivid detail of tapping the steering wheel, because that conveys the atmosphere and mood of nervous, tense waiting. Small details tend to bring scenes to life. Looking out, he can hear crowds shouting his name, just adding to the immense pressure that is crushing his shoulders. It felt like his head might burst in his crisp white helmet. An upgrade to this, in my opinion, would be to change from looking out to helmet to what I've got in the margin here. Look at some of the differences. The crowd roars his name. I've got a more vivid verb in there, and I've also used a relatively short sentence for an impactful moment. So rather than just looking out, he can hear the crowd shouting his name. The crowd roars his name. Now, straight after my short sentence, I use a fairly long one, which I join two short sentences together in using a semicolon. Immense pressure threatens to crush his shoulders. I've managed to get another vivid verb in. I've also cut out some of the unnecessary words. So just adding, for example, that's implied because roarings come just before. Now here's where I get a bit more vivid than the example in the original. Behind the mask of his blank white helmet, his face, flushed red, twitches and sweats. So what I've got there is, I've got the image of the mask and I'm contrasting the blank helmet with its white colour to what is within that people on the outside can't see. Contrast is a good way to build conflict in your description, and that is what tends to make it interesting. So I've got blank white helmet and then the flushed red face, twitching and sweating. Twitches and sweats as verbs, again, impart some energy to this description and they help to build the tension. I've also here put what I call a comma sandwich around flushed red. Note after face I have a comma and then after red. This means that the phrase flush red is sandwiched in between two commas. Now if you really want to draw attention to some detail, this is a great way to do it. It slows your sentence down and works a bit like a traffic light, forcing the reader to stop and look carefully. If I change that to his flushed red face twitches and sweats, you can see the difference. Behind the mask of his blank white helmet, his flushed red face twitches and sweats, versus behind the mask of his blank white helmet, his face flushed red twitches and sweats. So the comma sandwich is a good way for you to isolate detail that you want the reader to pay careful attention to. You can even do it with just one word. Here, his face, comma, red, comma, twitches and sweats would also have done the job. But I think flushed gets more of a sense of the mood and atmosphere in. Let's have a look at the next two paragraphs. Once the race starts, the immense noise from each car adds to one colossal, deafening sound. One thing you could do with this opening line is take the idea of one colossal, deafening sound and develop it using a metaphor. Perhaps it's like a wall of sound, for example, that surrounds the stadium, blocking anything from outside from coming in. That could be one idea. But a metaphor to make this idea of one colossal, deafening sound a little bit more impactful would be a good way to begin the paragraph. Capital letters for sentences again. The lights are out and the wheels spin madly, trying to grip the tarmac and grab a hold. I like grip and grab there together. I think the alliteration is effective. Tiny bits of rubber fling off the tyres, sticking to the cars behind. Fling is a good verb there. The smell of fuel hangs in the air, leaving a sour taste of petrol in your mouth. Good verb for hangs. Also, this is becoming more realistic now because it's not merely visual. He's getting all five senses into his description. The five senses are the foundation of good descriptive writing. Air rushes over the streamlined cars, whistling through fans and vents. Great verb choice again with rushes. So this is a pretty good paragraph. I haven't really got a lot to say about this other than fix the capitals at the start of the sentences and use a metaphor to develop this idea of the colossal deafening sound. The cheers from the crowd add to the racket. If he had included a metaphor in the first sentence, then this idea here of the cheers, which comes back to the beginning here of the noise could have meant that his first and last sentence of the paragraph would have worked a bit like bookends, holding the whole thing up. Probably the best bit about that paragraph is the verb choices. Also, make sure you understand that the sentences here, again, are relatively similar in length. They're all about a line and a half long. They also begin with noun phrases. Watch. The lights, tiny bits of rubber, the smell, the cheers. So that is an example of a type of monotony. You might be beginning sentences with different words every time, but in terms of the actual syntax or grammar of your sentences, you are still always using subject, verb, object. So one way to vary this would be to begin with an ing phrase like we said before. For example, we could have flying off the tires, comma, tiny bits of rubber stick to the cars behind. And that would at least give us one sentence that isn't beginning with a noun phrase. So that is an obvious thing to check after you finish each paragraph in your piece of description. In the crowds, one man is jumping violently, watch the spelling there, up and down, shouting support for his team like a small child excited on their birthday. You've got to be careful here with making sure that the tone is consistent. So I'm not 100% convinced that the image of a small child exciting on a birthday goes well with violently. There are probably better ways to join ideas than violence in children's birthdays. So a question for you here would be, could you use either a different simile so it suits violence better, or a different word from violent so that it suits the simile better? How about jumping ecstatically up and down like a small child excited on their birthday? That would work better. You might also want to get rid of is, which we have talked about at length already, and just use a better verb than jumping. In the crowd, one man leaps ecstatically up and down, shouting support for his team like a small child excited on their birthday. I think that would be an upgrade. There are thousands and thousands just like him, and they are all in unison becoming one enormous body. Now here is another example with the enormous body of a metaphor that you could develop. So take the idea of a body here and say that it becomes like a giant set of arms, for example, that is all waving throughout the crowd. Or develop the idea of different body parts. Perhaps they are all becoming one voice of one body. Think about how that image can work for you. Remember with the bees in the hive simile we did before, we had about 5 potential points we could make out of it to get us marks. The body one here is an excellent idea, but instead of developing it, he's just done a hit and run detail, like dropping in this pretty interesting metaphor and then leaving it, missing out on all the marks it could give him. Moving ahead to the last couple of paragraphs, we need to think really carefully about how to bring the description to an end. Most people's descriptions tend to just trail off, and you must avoid doing that. The penultimate paragraph is pretty good, but there's one particular thing that you must pay careful attention to. At the back is a camera being held up above the vibrating mass of people. It is constantly trying to capture every moment of this momentous occasion. Click, click, click. Now, this bit here, you mustn't do because there are no special sentences for description. That's a quote from the examiner's report. They say you must write proper sentences. There are no special sentences for description. We all know exactly what he's trying to do here, which is give us vivid, realistic details. And he's conveying the idea that it's happening quite quickly. But unfortunately, there's no subject-verb nexus or connection in this. Therefore, it isn't a sentence. This is the kind of thing you would tend to see more in a comic book. You can still get that effect if you choose your verbs carefully, but you can't actually write it like this. So this is called a fragment and we have to upgrade it. One change I would make would be from it is all the way down to click, click, click. What you could go for instead is incessantly capturing every moment of this momentous occasion. It clicks, whirs and hums. So I've got the idea of 3 things to say. I've also shown off my vocabulary a little bit more and been more precise, shown more variety. So I've got clicks, whirs and hums. And for extra marks, I've varied how I begin my sentence by using an ing phrase built around capturing. A great mix of colours follows. All the colours of the images flash up briefly on the screen, one after the other. A light cyan followed by a deep magenta and greens. Red and blues all follow. Be careful with the comma splicing. When you are introducing a list, you should also use a colon rather than a semicolon. Now this one here, from if you look into the lens, you can see the shutter flick down for each photo, but it goes so fast it is like the wings of a bee rapidly moving. Contains a good image with the wings of the bee, but it's got some unnecessary words that we can cut out so that good image stands out. I would change that 2.5 line sentence to just the shutter flutters like the wings of a bee. Then there's no padding. That makes it more effective. The last paragraph, like your opening paragraph, is very important because it is going to largely determine the examiner's final thoughts about your piece of writing. So you must leave a strong final impression. Later, when the event is over, the tarmac snake is empty. Look at how he is trying to echo the beginning of his description to give it a nice satisfying structure. The light shines on empty seats. One person is going round packing up. All the colours are black or bare concrete. Hot summer days still follow. However, no signs of activity. That's a fragment because there's no verb there. However, there are no signs of activity, for example, would be a sentence. Padlocked gates all round, no verb. Padlock gates are all around, for example. One lone security guard, no life. The snake sleeps. So he's gone back to his snake image, which is an effective ending. But as he's trying to create this sense of things calming down and using shorter sentences, he's fallen into the trap of not using full sentences. Now, one way that you can maintain that effect while still using full sentences would be something like this. And you can see where I've added in some more detail. As the crowd shuffles out, so I've got a more vivid verb there, and I'm also starting a sentence with as to vary my sentence constructions. As the crowd shuffles out, the lights flicker on empty seats. Note flicker for the vivid verb, and then more detail with the empty seats as he's got here. Taking a break from cleaning tickets and crumpled drinks from the stalls. So we've got specific small details for the scene now, tickets and drinks. The attendant in blue overalls eyes the track. So I've given more detail about him so the reader can picture him with the blue overalls. Eyes for the verb as well suggests this idea of curiosity. Above him flaps a banner. Burnt rubber lingers, smoking. The snake sleeps, race day resonates. So here, what we've gone for is just 5, 4, 3, 2 for our final sentences. We haven't gone 1 because that wouldn't be a sentence. Even just a verb as an imperative would be unlikely to work well. The 5, 4, 3, 2 technique forces you to choose your verbs carefully. We have remembered to echo the beginning using the end. The sleeping snake here recalls the snake from paragraph 1, and race day resonates is an echo of race day looms from the first paragraph. What we can say overall about this answer is that apart from silly mistakes like capitals and fragments, the main ways in which we've fixed it are taking more care to think about how we can maximize the marks we can get from each image we introduce. We're also trying to change sentence openings and lengths a bit more, and never mentioning a detail without being as precise as we can about it. One of its main strengths is the attempt to structure the whole answer using some images that are echoed throughout it. The CIE examiner's report has a few key tips for descriptive writing. One is to remember that you are not writing a story. This means that you shouldn't have very many events, you don't need to worry about plotting, and you don't need to worry too much about characterization. Leave all that for the narrative question if you decide to do it. You must, however, make your details precise, realistic, and appeal to all 5 senses, fully developing your images. You should avoid cliches, and you should also think very carefully about using fresh, perceptive, original images. If you develop your images fully, then it's likely you will achieve that. You mustn't use fragments, so all sentences must have proper verbs in. There are no special or separate rules for descriptive writing. Vocabulary must be chosen for deliberate effect, and you must try to maintain a consistent mood or atmosphere throughout the piece, making sure that you use sentence structures as well as word choice to achieve that. One way to keep you on the right track is to use this mnemonic. Detail, detail, detail. Remember, try to include about 3 things for each of the images or objects that you decide to include. This will ensure they're developed. Aim at about 8 paragraphs, roughly a quarter of a side for each one to get you 2 sides overall. This will ensure that you have what the mark scheme calls many images. All 5 senses matter. We must check for comma splicing at the end. We must have a sufficient range of sentence types and lengths. Sentence Tetris is a good way to achieve this. You should also check all your sentence openings to check you're not being monotonous. Imagery is vital. Make sure that each metaphor, simile, or symbol is explored in detail. Remember, say about 3 things about it. Vary your punctuation marks too. When you check for comma splicing, correcting them with semicolons is a good way to achieve this. Limit your time span to 1 minute. Think of description as a magnified moment, not a series of events. Cut out is, was, were. Use only interesting verbs. A dramatic 1-line paragraph can be a good way to finish. And avoid repeating vocabulary. You can repeat motifs or images as structural devices, but you shouldn't be, for example, using the word suddenly for many sentences at the start.